This coming weekend, residents of the Goderich, Ontario area may well see members of the Canadian Armed Forces approaching their homes and knocking on the door and insisting on speaking with them. So I thought it was important to do a video about this to talk a little bit about what's going on, some of the laws involved, and what you can do. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. So, as I indicated, there's an exercise coming up this coming weekend, the 3rd to the 5th of May 2024, in which the Canadian Armed Forces is going to be conducting some sort of practice of emergency situations, and that will include wellness checks where they'll be knocking on people's doors. Let's take a quick look first at the announcement on the City of Goderich website.
I suppose Goderich is a town, not a city. I misidentified it as a city. It's the town of Goderich, but here is their announcement. Link to this will be in the show description, but they have an article on their website entitled Military Exercise 2024. So, of course, they're reminding everyone that Goderich residents will notice a military presence throughout town as soldiers will be stationed in the community over the weekend. There's no reason for concern regarding this exercise, of course, but here's where I think there is reason to concern. Here's where I think there may be some reason for concern. Wellness checks or door knocks will be performed in Goderich on Saturday, May 4th. Soldiers will be going door to door and speaking with residents to simulate what would happen if they were asked to check on the well-being of residents during an actual emergency.
So let's talk about this a little bit. First, we'll look at what laws may or may not be involved. Is this legal, in short? Secondly, is it a good idea? Is it a good thing or not? And thirdly, my thoughts on what you can or cannot do or shouldn't do in this scenario. So first of all, is this legal? And I think it is legal. There's nothing in the National Defence Act or any other laws that prohibit the use of Canadian soldiers in aid of civil authorities. And in fact, we've seen this all the time over the years, from digging Toronto out from some snowfall to fighting floods to, during COVID, we saw them running vaccination clinics and helping out in senior citizens' homes or care homes that were having staffing issues during COVID-19. So we've seen that a lot. In the United States, the Posse Comitatus Act, which I have on the screen here, bars federal troops from participating in civilian law enforcement except when expressly authorized by law. In other words, when martial law is invoked by the president. So this law, I think, embodies the American tradition, the view that's been held in their culture for a long time, that sees military interference in civilian affairs as a threat to democracy and to individual liberty. We obviously have a different culture in Canada. We've historically had a different culture in Canada, and that one aspect of that is how the military has been used. As I just mentioned, our military has, quote, interfered, unquote, in civilian matters very frequently over the years. Is that a good or a bad thing? I'm not going to discuss in principle whether that's a good or bad thing too much on this channel, but this particular exercise that's being conducted, is this a good or a bad thing? Is having soldiers go up to do these wellness checks or door knocks a good thing? Now, I think in principle, having military assist the civil arm, not necessarily a bad thing. Some of those examples I've cited, I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that was a good thing that they were able to help out with that and augment the workforce that's generally available to the state. Checking on people to see if they're okay. In a vacuum, that doesn't seem too nefarious. Well, if you have concerns over people, you want to check to see, are they okay, and give them the help they need if they need it. The problem comes in how these laws are being practically put into effect. And this is something I've talked about in a number of episodes, is the precedents that were set during COVID-19 and these use of emergency powers and what is defined as an emergency. And we can see the fallout from COVID-19. Some people might still argue that, oh, that was a valid emergency. I would disagree. I think the numbers were completely overblown. People might say, well, it's because it was treated like emergency is why it was overblown. But really, looking at the Freedom Convoy, that was, I mean, the courts have now ruled that that was not an emergency. Now it's being appealed, but I think that the federal court ruling that we've reviewed a few episodes ago, that was some solid legal reasoning. And now look at what else has been determined an emergency. They declared an emergency over an eclipse in Niagara region just recently. They declared an emergency over snowfall where people were locked in their homes for 10 days in the Maritimes. I believe it was Nova Scotia, possibly New Brunswick. You can see what happens once that barrier has been crossed of you invoking martial law. Let's call the Emergencies Act what it really is. It's martial law. Never been used before. Now that it's been used, the seal has been broken. And now these things are being trotted out all the time, because if something that's essentially a stronger clue, or really, if a peaceful protest that involves bouncy castles and people dancing on the street, if that's an emergency worthy of martial law, well then yeah, some snowfall is probably an emergency as well, maybe even a solar eclipse. So now we're getting into this, what sort of other quote unquote emergencies are we setting the tone for? Are we setting the stage for by deploying soldiers in Goderich, and what are we getting people used to? I'd be much less concerned about this if we had a track record in recent years of government using emergency powers only when it's a really dire emergency, and that's the only way that you can deal with it. But that's not what we see here. Wellness checks in and of themselves are something that have become very problematic in recent years. In my view, they're often used as an excuse to make a warrantless entry into a home. You knock on the door, oh, people don't answer, they must be unwell, we need to kick in the door and have a look around and turn the place upside down to make sure people are fine. And I see that a lot, especially in the context of domestic violence cases or suspected domestic violence. Now, at least those are cases where a 911 call has been made. So there's some indication that maybe something's going on, and the police, maybe they hear some yelling through the door. Okay, but here, there's now wellness checks where there's no reason to expect there's something wrong with that particular individual, just because there's this emergency situation. Let's say there's another solar eclipse. Now we need to knock on every door to see if people are okay. I make sure they didn't look at the sun through their window or something. And there could be warrantless searches as well, because, oh, people don't answer the door. Although I would think that not answering the door is going to be much safer than talking and not giving them hassle. So that leads me into what can be done about this. So this also goes back into the legality of it. Is it legal for them to knock on the door? Yes, it's legal for them to knock on the door. Does that mean you need to answer the door? Absolutely not. Please have a search for episode 1 of Don't Talk TV. We're linking it below. We'll put it in the show description as well. Watch that video for a more in-depth look at what are your rights, why you do not have to answer the door. You never have to answer the door. There's no duty to answer your door. It's your home. You're allowed to do what you want to do with it. And I think that the best way of dealing with this situation, I think the best response to send a message to the military that we don't think this is a good way for our military to be used. It should be used to defend the country, not to harass citizens. Is to not answer the door. I don't think answering the door and berating or being rude to these soldiers is a great idea. I mean, you're most likely going to be encountering some young kids who are reservists. They're just doing what their officers told them to do. They don't really know anything. Yelling at them might make you feel good, but not really going to do much. You could ask to speak to their officer, but in my view, it's better to just exercise your rights. Do not answer the door. And that means don't answer the door. Don't talk to them through a Ring camera. Don't talk to them through a window. Don't talk to them, period. Act as if they're not even there. Now, again, watch episode 1 for more detail on that. Another thing you can do.
Going back to Goderich's website here, questions about this exercise can be directed to 31 Canadian Brigade Group Public Affairs Officer Lieutenant Paul Verhey at paul.verhey@forces.gc.ca. We'll put his email address into the show description for ease of use. If you think this exercise is a good idea, if you think it's a bad idea, why not send some feedback to this public affairs officer? That, I think, could be very effective as well. I remember when I was in the Canadian Armed Forces in the Royal Winnipeg Rifles back in the early 2000s, we were thinking of doing an exercise in downtown Winnipeg to simulate setting up roadblocks and checkpoints to prepare soldiers for going to Bosnia. That was eventually canceled due to public backlash. So negative public perception of training like this can have an impact.
Of course, if you live in the Goderich area, you can also always speak to your town councilors, your MPP. I think it's good to give feedback and make sure they know what people think of these sorts of training exercises happening in their community and the military being employed in this manner. Now, of course, this video is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, you contact a lawyer so you can get advice tailored to your particular situation. If you want me to be that lawyer, my contact information is below. If there's anything you'd like to see us discuss on this channel, please send an email to the email address listed below or leave a comment in the comment section. And if you found this video at all interesting, helpful, or informative, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and following us on social media.